Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justice and Human Rights Talks, hosted by Northern Justice Watch. In this episode, we're continuing with our previous guest, Dr. Davut Akca, who was explaining us and talking us about the findings of his research. So before I get into what we're going to talk about today, Dr. Akca, welcome back, and it's a pleasure having you here again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the last episode, as you may have watched, we talked a little bit about the research that was conducted in partnership with Lakehead University and Northern Justice Watch, in which there were findings at four different levels: individual, community level, public safety, and the international level. So Dr. Akca talked a little bit about the individual and the public safety elements of that research and how the findings were at those levels. So we're gonna move on from there and start off with the public safety aspect. Dr. Akca, can you tell us a little bit about those findings and what were some of the results that you came across at that level of your research?
Sure. So for those who didn't listen the first part of the podcast, I strongly recommend to listen to that first, because it's important to understand the background of this research and what Hizmet community is, what their experiences are. And then like the individual level and community level impacts are related to the next two levels, which is public safety level and international level. As I said, this is a multi-layered impacts finding, and all of these layers are interconnected, like they are related to each other. Individual level impacts cannot be differentiated from the community level, or the community level impacts cannot be differentiated from the public safety and international level. So they are all interconnected, and they are all connected to the main factor here, which is the hate speech and hate crimes. So again, just to remind, hate speech is originated from the people of power. When it comes from the people of power, like politicians, leaders of a country, or leaders of a political group, it becomes more detrimental because their followers follow them and listen to them, and they are affected by that speech. And the communities become more polarized, and that polarization does not stay within the borders of the country. It goes beyond the borders, and it follows the communities who immigrate, who has to seek refuge in other countries. So there is a concept used in the literature, which is spillover effects, which means that the conflicts which are experienced in a country spill over or spread over other countries where the citizens of that country move or immigrate. For example, there is a high number of existence of Turkish population in Germany. And among that population, there are Kurdish people who are also coming from Turkey. Whenever the tension between Turkish and Kurdish people increases in Turkey, that conflict spills over to Germany. And there are conflicts, the clashes that we observe between Turkish and Kurdish communities in Germany. So a similar threat, similar problem or potential conflict can be seen in the case of Hizmet community, because as a response to our survey questions, the majority of our respondents said that their community, like the Hizmet community, is like getting more distance from the other Turkish communities living in Canada. 92% of our participants, by the way, the number of participants again was 318. 92% of them said that there is a growing polarization between Turkish communities, the other Turkish communities in Canada, and Hizmet movement. And another one, 67% of them said that there is again growing polarization between Hizmet movement and other Muslim communities in Canada. So which is, again, based on the initial example that I gave in Germany, this is a potential point that we need to look at in terms of public safety in Canada. Like there is a potential conflict between these two groups. If we cannot prevent this increasing polarization, there might be more detrimental impacts of this hate speech and hate crime. That's something interesting that we found in the research. So that's the public safety impacts, actually.
It is, and it is quite interesting because, like, the first example that you give, which is a spillover effect, you're talking about a spillover effect between communities that are based in Turkey, but then you also expand that a little bit and give examples of how that can actually affect communities based in Canada, which are not from Turkey at all, and that even in itself can generate conflicts at certain levels. So it's indeed quite interesting. And at the very end of this episode, I do want to have I do want to ask another question about the implications of this for Canadian policymakers as well. But before that, let's continue with that last level, the international level, and explain us, please, if you can, what were some of the findings that you found at that level?
Mhm. So that's an interesting part of the study as well. Like we asked them about the ongoing activities of the Turkish government against them, like the espionage activities, which is again related to the hate concept, because the hate speech and hate crimes facilitates these activities, the espionage activities. They can recruit the members of the other communities, other Turkish communities in Canada or in Europe against the members of the Hizmet community. They kind of work for the Turkish government and give their information to them, or kind of conduct some surveillance activities against them, report their addresses, their private information to the Turkish government. And this is facilitated by the hate speech again. So this is an international level impact. And a new concept that has been increasingly used in Canada and other countries is foreign interference. Foreign interference is discussed in Canada for the last couple of years, especially in the context of Chinese governments' activities, or Russian governments, or Iranian, Indian governments' activities in Canada. So this should be considered in the same context as well, because as we know, Turkish government is increasingly using these espionage activities. And even they are now kidnapping people, not from Canada yet. It didn't happen in Canada yet, but it happened in different parts of the world, in African countries, in Central Asian countries, and even Eastern European countries. The Turkish intelligence agencies agents worked with the local governments to kidnap people and bring them back to Turkey, and they tortured them. They interrogated by using torture techniques against them, which is a really worrying impact of the hate speech. And again, as I said, the use of label, especially the FETÖ label, when you label people as terrorists in today's world, like when you call someone terrorist, everyone will be scared. Like no one will question behind that label. So even the suspicion of being a terrorist will make people at least stay away from the discussion. They will not protect you. They will not stand behind you. And that is the case in the case of the kidnappings and surveillance. Like the Turkish government gains the opportunity to be active in other countries and interfere in the affairs of the other countries easily, like doing espionage, surveillance, kidnapping, and working with the other Turkish communities, the members of other Turkish communities, to recruit them to work against the Hizmet Movement members. Talking about the numbers, like 87% of our participants expressed their concerns about these activities, these espionage activities in Canada. And they're also worried about the alarming rise in the transnational repression activities like kidnapping, surveillance, assault, and threats against Hizmet members in Canada. 67% of them said so. And those living outside of Turkey in general, the number is more than that, like 92% of them are worried about these activities. So again, to wrap up what we said about all the impacts, individual level, community level, public safety level, and international level. Hate speech, especially the FETÖ label, four-letter label, doesn't stay within the borders. It goes beyond that, and it affects the whole life of people, the community, and the public safety of other countries. So from there, we can go to what we can do with that.
Exactly. And I want to take off of that very last point of yours, basically, where you talk a little bit about what this research means. And that was going to be my next question as well. So you've conducted this research with members of a community which, until a very recent period of time, were predominantly based in Turkey. But obviously, you're based in Canada. This research was conducted in Canada. So what's the relevance of this research, especially tying back to your last point, for us, for those who are in Canada?
Mhm. So there's a coordinated response needed to address this problem, and that coordination will happen between government institutions, non-governmental institutions, the Hizmet community itself, and human rights organizations. Like that, we need to all these parties need to act together to respond to this problem. At the level of Canadian government, the first thing to do is like becoming aware of this problem. As I know, Northern Justice Watch now is going to MPs and decision makers, policy makers to share the findings of this report. And interestingly, they hear this event, like they hear this problem at first time when they visit. That's something that we need to be considerate. Like there is a lack of awareness of this issue. And like organizations like Northern Justice Watch or the Hizmet community itself, they have an established organization in Canada and in other Western countries. They should use these findings to advocate for their own safety first, and then for raising the awareness among policymakers, decision makers, and practitioners. On the police side, again, we need to raise their awareness about this issue. Polarization is everywhere. Hate speech and hate crimes are everywhere. I know that Canadian hate crime units, the police hate crime units, are very busy nowadays because of the tensions happening in different parts of the world, like between Israel and Palestine and other issues across the world. Canada is a really multicultural society, and those tensions are experienced here as well. And everyone are concerned, and they go to police. And at that point, Hizmet community should be aware that there are specialized and experts hate crime units in the major police departments in Canada. Almost all major police departments has their own hate crime units. They need to introduce themselves, like Hizmet community representatives should go to those units and introduce themselves and share their concerns in general, like these general concerns. But in specific individual level, the members of the community should report these experiences to the police so that the police will become aware of this issue. And again, the number of reporting of hate crimes is very low in Canada. Like only 20% of people report hate crimes to police. They need to report what they experience. And as I see now, there are a few cases are being reported. For example, in Edmonton, Alberta, one member of the Hizmet community who was an academic in Turkey, like experienced a hate crime. One person approached him in a coffee shop and used the label of veto against him and threatened him. And he shared this on social media, and he said that he reported that to the police. And there are legal regulations that regulates the investigations and the trials about hate crimes in Canada. So those legal regulations maybe can be revised according to the needs of this community. That's something that the Canadian Parliament should consider. And actually, the Northern Justice Watch is inviting the Canadian Parliament to have a motion to discuss these issues, like in a very broad sense. And all these impacts should be discussed in the Parliament, and a general awareness increasing should be ensured.
Mhm.
On the Hizmet community side, again, other than reporting the crime, reporting the hate speech, there is a need for support for the victims, as we see the number of like scores in PTSD and mental health results, individual level impacts, like their lifestyles have changed detrimentally. Families need support. So their family life, their individual life is under the threat of this problem. And the Hizmet community should work with professionals should work with relevant institutions and organizations, governmental and non-governmental, to support their members mentally and like family-wise. Their children should be protected so that their resilience against these threats should be protected and improved.
It is a, just like the research itself, I feel like the findings of this sort of multifaceted research should also be multi-layered and multifaceted, so that there are elements that require the Hizmet community to maybe take some lessons from or to act upon, and the same goes for the for the Canadian policymakers and decision makers as well. So it is very interesting indeed, and especially you presenting these from all these different aspects is definitely worth discussing. So thank you for that, Doctor, again.
Maybe one more thing, we need more research to understand this, because of like the impacts of hate speech. When we look at the literature, there's not enough study to understand that. We focused on this on a specific community here, but in general, like when we look at the historical examples of genocides and crimes against humanity, and the current issues across the world, like the current polarizations, the conflicts across the world, in almost all of them, there is one major and common factor, which is the hate speech, political hate speech. It makes people like polarized. It initiates or incites hatred against people. And there is a very well-known 10-step process of genocide. And the initial steps of genocides are all about hate speech and hate propaganda. Like this propaganda make people against each other, like the conflicts start with those words. And there was an interesting and very powerful social media campaign about Holocaust in like 2021, 3 years ago. And there was a hashtag for that. It started with words. Hashtag it started with words. Like even the worst case in the world that happened in the human history, Holocaust, started with words, started with the propaganda machine of Goebbels. Like this is the same thing. If we cannot prevent this hate speech and make people, taking people accountable for their actions, hate and hatred actions, the results will be as detrimental as that. I'm afraid.
And so as a last point then, from your this last point of yours, I'm understanding that the research itself then serves as a preventive function, if I'm getting this correct. Am I right?
Exactly. Like the research is done for taking the picture of this issue and showing people that this is the case, and everyone should learn from that and then take the necessary actions. The government, non-government organizations, the community itself, and the individuals should learn from it. But our responsibility is to disseminate these findings so that people will understand it, not just writing it and putting it away. Like I congratulate Northern Justice Watch for their activities to disseminate this information and raise awareness among policymakers, decision makers, and the community members.
We appreciate that, and we thank you as well for conducting this research in partnership with Northern Justice Watch and supporting our mission in this regard as well. So thank you both for your partnership and for these 2 episodes that you shared with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me again.